So, hello, good afternoon, and good morning for those joining from the US. A warm welcome to today's discussion titled Reinventing During COVID, Fraud Survival Kit for Merchants. Again, thank you so much for joining today. During the pandemic, shoppers have shifted purchasing habits to minimize trips to the store. But when digital commerce won't do, they now expect contactless payments, buy online, pick up in store services, and other low-risk, high-tech solutions to be available to them. Along with the spike in card non-present transactions, merchants are seeing a proliferation of fraud in this changing environment. So, when every transaction counts, what steps can merchants take to meet consumers where they want to be and overcome the fear of fraud to maximize revenue? My name is Melisande Mouwal, and I'm the publisher of The Papers, the Netherlands-based independent leading global source of news and analysis for professionals in payments, commerce, and fintech. And I'm delighted to co-host and moderate a fireside chat about these key topics with Vesta and Chartlytics Consulting. But first, some notes on housekeeping. The conversation will take approximately 20 minutes, and we will have like 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A at the end of our discussion. Don't be shy, you can ask questions at any time throughout the presentation by just typing your questions in the GoToWebinar Q&A window. During the presentation, we will compile questions and we will address as many as possible at the end of the discussion. So, Carice and Ron, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Absolutely. Good morning, Melisande. I'm from the US, so it is still early here. I am Carice Hendrick, and I am the founder and principal consultant of Chartlytics Consulting. I am also the host of the Fraudology podcast, which actually just launched last week. I previously had been the co-host of the Online Fraudcast podcast. So like you, I really am passionate about education and collaboration among merchants, primarily on the CNP fraud side, though I've been in fraud and payments for over 15 years. And I have, in my career, especially in the last 7 years, I've worked with hundreds of the largest brands on the merchant side. And really, I'm the person they call when they don't know who else to ask the questions to. So that's really what I'll be, and I love that. So that's really what experience I'll be drawing from today.
Well, great having you. And Ron, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Ron Hines. I'm the CEO at Vesta, and I hope they call us once in a while too, Carice, when they need some help, because that's what we do. And we are a fraud and approval enhancement as a service platform, working globally, all across the world, and excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Carice, could you please kick off our conversation?
Thank you. Sure can. Yeah. So just to set the stage for everyone, let's see here. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate here. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. Let's see here. Okay. So, this is something that has actually was prior to COVID, but I think it's really good and important to set the stage that fraud was already on the rise quite a bit before our world got turned upside down and everyone flocked to e-commerce, and consumers' behavior patterns changed so rapidly, as Melisande explained. And even prior to COVID, fraud is growing at 2 times the pace of revenue. This is something that I've been watching very closely over the last several years, and it's something that I think a lot of people are watching closely. That card not present fraud, online fraud, is really where it's coming to, with card present fraud being more challenging to commit globally now, not just in Europe. That it's really taking a rise. Additionally, at the current rate of CNP fraud, online retailers will lose $130 billion between now and 2023. I would actually venture to say I'm interested to see this study next year, just because of how much I've seen fraud grow in the last 6 months. I would imagine that this, unfortunately, will be bumped up a few more billion next year. But then here's the other side, and this is the balance that all retailers that accept payments online really have to face, is that you're not just worried about the bad guys and canceling the orders before they become chargebacks, there is another side of it, and that is the good customers who unfortunately sometimes have risky behavior. Good customers can look bad and bad customers can look good. No order comes in blinking red lights saying this is fraud, and that's why there are such good technology, why technology companies like Vesta are so important. And so it's important to know that while there will be $130 billion of CMP fraud that will be lost, $121 million in false positives are really, that's the cost now. And they cost online merchants 13 times more than actual fraud. And something I say often on this topic is that when a good customer has their order canceled out of suspicion for fraud, you are essentially referring them to your highest competitor. They sometimes, depending on your company and their loyalties, they will call customer service and they will try to validate that it is them. But a lot of times, if you sell items that other competitors do as well, they will take their business to your competitor, and that's a way to lose them for life. So it's something to understand the stakes. But again, it's a balancing game, which is why it's so important to continually refine your processes. So with that said, I think I kind of wanted to just do a level set. When I think of card not present fraud, there are really three buckets that we put most of the behavior and transactional fraud into. One is carding, and that this is the term used by the fraudster side, but we just call it credit card fraud over here, but same thing. It's when a stolen credit card is used to make a purchase online. And if it's successful, if that order goes through and if the goods or service are provided, oftentimes the merchant will receive a chargeback in 2 to 3 months, depending on, and sometimes sooner. Account takeovers, this is something we saw starting about 8-9 years ago on the online gaming space, and now it's rampant all over. Any online business that has user accounts is definitely subject to this and a target of this, and that is when an existing user account is hijacked by a fraudster to make a purchase on the card on file or using the legacy of the account, because up until account takeover really became prevalent, a lot of fraud rule systems, the ones that use linear rules, if this and this then that is kind of how I explain it, they would weight the legacy of an account quite heavily. So new accounts would be subject to more fraud review. So this is the way they got around that. And then friendly fraud is something we really saw in the last economic crisis in 2008 to 2010, and it has remained prevalent. And that is when a true cardholder is involved in the purchase, whether they know the person making the purchase. For instance, my daughter sometimes uses my card to purchase games online. That could be friendly fraud if she wasn't so good at coming to me and giving me her babysitting cash before she made the purchase. Or also a lot of it's buyer's remorse or wanting to take advantage of the chargeback process. And friendly fraud is actually something that I have focused a big chunk of my career on. Chargelytics is actually just chargebacks and analytics smushed together. So it's one of my favorite topics, which most people think is crazy, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But that was just kind of, those three things are really the three biggest buckets of fraud that we're seeing. And with COVID coming in, it really just accentuated all that. A lot of it was we were seeing a lot of the same behavior and activity, but just on a much higher, faster scale. So these were statistics taken towards the beginning of the coronavirus, and I think the uncertainty is certainly something to take into account. We won't have the data on exactly how this impacted all merchants for a little while longer, but 36% of retailers surveyed said that their e-commerce business will be down due to the coronavirus, while 26% said that e-commerce will be as projected. So there were a lot of retailers feeling that their business would be impacted, but on the flip side, online sales had increased by 52% compared to the same time frame a year ago, because a lot of online shoppers have increased as well. There were over 8.8% just since the coronavirus began, and this was between February and I believe mid to late April. So I'm sure that number has doubled even more or increased even more. And so really you're looking at 36% of retailers saying that their e-commerce business will be down, but online sales increasing by 52%. And really what I saw that contributes to that is that every single retailer had a different experience with the coronavirus, especially by vertical. A lot of times we start to see trends that impact all CMP merchants across the board, but COVID was really, it really projected a lot of things. And one of them was that a lot of the retailers where a lot of people had, they had essential goods, there was online deliveries being provided, all of those, their sales shot up very high. And then there were a lot of retailers who, travel and event ticketing is a very good example, where their business didn't just stay stagnant, it completely tanked. So that's where you're seeing these percentages really be evened out. Someone sent me this comic towards the beginning of COVID, and I just found it very appropriate. And we don't always get subject to humor in this industry, so I think a little levity is definitely important. So the fraud concerns in COVID varied greatly by vertical, as I mentioned, more than usual. A great example of that is in the first week or two, especially when the US was starting to notice that this was going to be impacting them as well. I was getting a lot of emails and calls from people in the event ticketing space, in amusement parks and in travel, online travel agencies and airlines, etc. And so I actually said, well, why don't we all just hop on a call? Let's help each other. And that call has actually been happening bi-weekly since the very first week of March. And it's been one of these days I should write a book about just the trajectory of the conversations. But I can say that at the beginning, there was such stark concern about the just complete tank of sales, and their call centers were flooded with people wanting to cancel their services, and management needed to make a decision. Do we have enough revenue to cover all of these refunds, especially for marketplaces in travel? A lot of them had already credited the people fulfilling those travel, whether it's someone's personal home or another airline or whatever it was. And so they really had to make a lot of decisions. And I was able to help them navigate, based on the newer Visa and MasterCard rules and regulations on chargebacks, how to respond to those correctly to retain as much revenue as possible. Something that does concern me, however, is with those the companies that have the digital currency and digital value and stored value to their consumers' accounts. So for instance, if you had a trip that was 1,200 euro on an airline and they credited you, my concern is that if you're using, the consumer, are using the same password for multiple accounts, that is very subject to account takeover to retrieve the stored value items and putting them somewhere else and reselling them for value. But the merchant typically is the one that takes responsibility for any lost value of an account due to an account takeover, not because of any rules or regulations, but because it's the right thing to do from a customer perspective. So that is something that I've been really concerned about is, are you, the merchant, helping your consumers understand password hygiene? Are you forcing resets? Are you requiring them to have strong passwords? Those are just some of the things. Retailers have also seen just increase in carding attempts. Refunding fraud for retailers is a very large issue that is something that I've definitely been discussing on the podcast, and it's just too detailed to go into today. Gift card fraud as well. Really, if you think about it, the fraudsters were home and they were bored too. And whenever there's a financial impact and economic impact, there's a lot of consumers that are going to be looking for the item that they want or need at a much reduced price. So the fraudsters know that, and they want to take advantage of that. Moving forward, these are all things, obviously we could all spend an hour talking about, but I wanted to just give a high level of what companies were experiencing. And especially on the retail side, likewise, similar to the ticketing and travel companies, I was having a lot of the top retailers in the US as well as internationally reaching out to me those first few weeks saying, hey, we're also seeing some weird customer behavior, what's happening here? and they all wanted to know what are other merchants saying. And I can do that. I love being kind of the center of the wheel of the spoke, so to speak. But when I start seeing a pattern, it's just so much better to me to get all of the merchants to hop on a call together, whether they've known each other before or not. A lot of times they haven't. So it's really my honor and privilege to get to introduce them to each other. And then I try my best to sit back and let them answer each other's questions. As a consultant, I'm so used to wanting to go in and fix the problem and answer questions, but I think we've gotten a pretty good cadence of both. But the retailers were really concerned about a lot of things, but one of the main concerns they had, especially when all in-person stores were closed in the US as well as in other countries too, was they were seeing such a steep reduction in sales, especially the retailers that didn't have essential items. They weren't selling hand sanitizer or cleaner. They were selling clothing or electronics. They were noticing that as their sales went down, their senior leadership was looking and saying, hey, why are you canceling that order? What about that order? And they were really looking at all the orders being canceled, which I actually think is an excellent process. I think too often, sometimes merchants who are focused on fraud prevention, or maybe not focused on fraud prevention, will allow their provider to go on autopilot. And in some cases, that's the best thing. There are some providers that are built to be on autopilot and who can be trusted with those. And Vesta is definitely one of those. But there are others that you as a merchant really need to take a vested interest in and look at the data and look at what's being canceled on your behalf, because that's your money, not your providers. And so this really gave the fraud department an opportunity. I don't know if they necessarily saw it as an opportunity at first. I tried to reframe it as that way. It can definitely be frustrating to have senior leadership who don't understand anything about fraud, just upset about the amount of orders being canceled, but it's a good opportunity to be able to re-examine the risk providers. Not all risk providers are created equal, especially as there's more and more entering the market. Ensuring that the provider that worked great for you 3 years ago is still working for you with the fraud problems that you're having now. Being able to look at the models or the rules and know that you are able to be more surgical than clubbing them over the head, so to speak, or the difference between line fishing and fishing with a net, so to speak. Work with your fraud providers. Really a lot of them worked with their fraud providers to ensure accuracy and to create a feedback loop of sorts. And then, sometimes it's really good to work with a third party to review the risky orders, or to add an extra layer of risk, or have them, look at the orders that you think you're going to cancel to have them approve the transaction. And for the companies that do take on the liability, if a fraud chargeback is received, that can be a double bonus. That can be a way that you can go to your leadership and say, hey, I've found a win-win. We can, still process this way, but anything that we think we want to reduce, we're going to have someone else look at it with that this is all that they do, and they will guarantee that chargeback. So those are really things that getting an extra set of eyes can be really helpful. I've definitely helped several merchants in a risk assessment this year. For this reason, COVID has impacted consumer behavior so much, and that means that it has impacted fraud behavior as well. And so it's really important to not just take a blind eye and think, oh, okay, fraud is fraud. It was the same last year as it is this year. No, it's really important to know your good customer behavior, as well as your those that want to use your service. Because as I always say, if a retailer or any company online can make money selling your goods and services, then chances are a fraudster can too, and they will.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I would definitely write that book, about all these events since March. I would be really excited to read all this and to get some views behind the scene, because it must have been scary what happened in March and after. Quick question before we hand over to Ron. I know chargeback is your favorite topic.
It is.
Visa and MasterCard has changed some of the rules around chargebacks.
Mm-hmm.
Did that help merchants, and are they able to contest these chargebacks now more effectively?
So the rules that were changed specific to COVID were really specific to certain MCC codes and merchant category codes. It wasn't a blanket for all merchants. There were other changes that have been in the works for all merchants prior to COVID, but I mean, there was no way around it. They had to be reactionary. So I'm not using reactionary in a bad way this way. I was really grateful to see Visa and MasterCard responding to that and listening to merchant concerns about that. And that was specifically more for the merchants who saw a steep dip in sales and an increase in chargebacks very quickly, like the travel and ticketing companies. So they took away the, well, I shouldn't say took away, they suspended the excessive chargeback monitoring program for those MCC codes, as well as they allowed some special allowances for responding to chargebacks. And Visa and MasterCard were a little bit different in what they were requiring. I actually had the honor and privilege, and honestly, I wanted to help these guys so much. I just said, here, I'm going to write out a chargeback template for you. Usually I charge for this, but I just want to help you using the rules and the new ways. And I hear that's really helped. So I think for those merchants, yes, it has been helpful. For other retailers that didn't fall in that MCC code, there has been lenience and grace on the dreaded 1% or 0.9% now, as Visa has changed that as of last year. But things seem to really be evening out now. I would say that the worst storm is behind us, or knock on wood, with chargebacks, but that I was definitely grateful, and I know those merchants were too, that Visa and MasterCard did respond for the merchants that were really experiencing the most chargeback volume at once.
Yeah, so no, it's good to hear that the industry did help merchants to basically, mitigate all these hard situations. So it would be great, Ron, if you could tell a little bit about your company and how you're helping merchants to, navigate through these tough times. Could you please unmute yourself, Ron?
Not muted. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Carice, great stuff, great background. I just have a couple of slides to introduce folks on the line to Vesta. I like to say we're a 25-year-old startup. We really are a global fintech pioneer. And I would say we're at the bleeding edge of payment and account fraud protection and approval enhancement technologies for the last 15 years. And what we focus on is not just, is really not about taking fraud off the table, but taking the fear of fraud off the table for our customers so that they can focus on what's important to them, and that's growing revenue. What do you get with a 25-year-old startup? Well, one, you get a company that just completed a fresh capital raise, which will support and enhance an aggressive growth strategy. But you also get experience, patience, know-how, and most importantly, you can see from the stats here on the slide, massive amounts of data that really help us not just look smarter than we are, but actually be much smarter than we are. Billions of transactions and billions of dollars, and many of those fraudulent, and helping build the models that we use today. Our customers see increased approval rates, which helps them maximize revenue. And we do all this using patented AI and machine learning technology and data science. And we deliver decisions either yes or no, good or bad, on individual transactions back to our customers in well under 1 second. And we're so confident in what we do, we provide 100% chargeback guarantee. So if we tell you a transaction is good, the transaction is good. You don't have to worry about it. If it turns out to be fraudulent, we at Vesta own that, and we deal with it. You can move to the next slide. Thanks. I think there's a couple of builds here. Yeah. So this is kind of how we do what we do. You know, we have a saying at Vesta. It's not fraud that will kill your business. It's the fear of fraud that will kill your business. You know, Carice shared a stat earlier. You know, $120 billion in annual lost sales for fear of fraud, generating false positives. Our payment guarantee allows our customers to really take that fear of fraud off the table because they leave that to us and focus on what's important. Increasing traffic, number one. You know, companies spend a ton of money to market and attract new customers, bring them to their website. And if you're not closing sales, you're not maximizing the investment on that marketing. And how we do it, we work with our customers and they embed really two simple bits of code into their website and their transaction flow that allow us to, one, see how a shopper shops on their site. You know, generally, you know, good customers shop one way, fraudsters shop another, and robots shop yet a third way. And that's very valuable data that gets fed back into our transaction decision platform to help us inform our decision. And then the second bit is, you know, we gather enough data through the checkout process to determine if the shopper is who they say they are. Is Melisande Melisande? And from that, you know, we feed all that into our transaction decision platform, assess it, and in, you know, less than a second, as I said earlier, we make a decision. And as I said, if we say a transaction is good, the good news for our customers are the transaction is good, they'll be paid. And if it turns out to be fraudulent, as I said earlier, we own that fraud and we manage, you know, the process from there forward. You can go to the next slide. And so what's the impact? Increased revenue, first and foremost. Our customers see anywhere from, you know, 15 to 25% increase in approval rate, which leads to increase in revenue. And if you think about that, you spend all this money to bring someone to your website and only to create a terrible shopping experience, whether it's for a good, you know, an existing customer or a new customer. As Carice said, or I think as Carice said earlier, you know, that's not opportunity lost just on that sale. It's, in all likelihood, it's opportunity lost for any future sales as well, because they will go somewhere else and they will find someone that will approve their transaction. And, you know, listen, you know, we're all human. No one likes to be rejected. And we generally stay away from folks that have rejected us in the past. 0% fraud loss. So it's full transfer of fraud liability from them, our customers, to us, and for chargebacks. And, you know, lastly, it's 100% automated. You know, it's real time and it's automated updating to our transaction decision platform. And that's critical to stay at pace. No, I didn't say to stay ahead, but to stay at pace with the criminals that are out there perpetrating fraud. You know, waiting days or even weeks to update models can, and, you know, certainly will have an adverse impact on customers and on the business. Those are the highlights. I just wanted to give people a quick, you know, overview of who we are and what we do, so that we could, you know, we could get to some of the meatier stuff and talk about some questions.
Sure. Well, you did a great job there, Ron. And we get some questions. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience. And as I mentioned, don't be shy. This is your opportunity to get all your questions to Ron and to Carice. to great experts in their field. Would like to kick off with the first question. Carice, Ron, whoever wants to take it. During the pandemic, we've seen a lot of brick and mortar store moving online. So a lot of companies basically new to e-commerce were moving online. Could you tell us a little bit about these? What are the biggest challenges for these customers that might not have a data set or are pretty new to this whole digital space? So how do you, what are the challenges and how can merchants or these merchants respond to this?
I'll jump in first. I think first and foremost, the biggest risk for any merchant, new or old for that matter, is that no one shops at their site, period. Right? So there's a big investment in helping people understand who you are and what you sell, and getting people to your site. The second risk, biggest risk in my mind, is that you do a great job on number one, lots of people show up, and then they have a lousy experience, a lousy shopping experience, for many different reasons possibly, but most notably, declining good customers. And that's really where we come in, right? Ensuring customers are treated well, and that good customers' transactions are approved is essential. And you encapsulate that all into, a risk or an opportunity statement. It's really, how do you manage fraud and grow revenue at the same time? It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. We've been doing it for a long time, and there are others out there that are doing it as well. It's not just a Vesta thing, by the way. And we tend to think we do it better than anyone, but it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for small merchants or big merchants even. Do you have the resources? Do you have the know-how? Can you build your own fraud solution? Those are the biggest things for me. And answering that question of, am I going to do it on my own, or am I going to do it with someone to help me?
Any comment on that, Carice, or anything to add here?
Yeah, I think I'd add, I've worked with a lot of companies over the years, especially towards the beginning of my career in payment processing, worked with a lot of companies in Silicon Valley that were just starting. And I think that to the outside, to people who haven't accepted payments online, it looks so easy, right? They don't realize that there are rules to follow and that there are and that their money can be taken back away. So if somebody calls them and says, hey, I really want to place an order for 20,000 units, fraudsters want to take advantage of the new guys because they know that most of them don't know what they're doing. So, the small business owner or the, new manager is so excited about online. They're like, yes, someone's really excited about our company. They want to order 20,000 units. And yeah, right. Like, woohoo, we can go on vacation. And then 2 months later, they get a chargeback and all that money's taken out of their account. And a lot of merchants don't realize that that can happen until it's already happened. And I have my own set of issues with payment processors, possibly maybe not explaining that as much or not providing as much training there. Some do it way better than others, but a lot of times, especially with the newer payment facilitators, it's just, you can set up card acceptance in, an hour. And a lot of times you don't know. So I think, of course, because I look at things through a risk perspective, that's what I think of as being trusting too fast. But also absolutely being able to balance good customers with bad customers. You can always have 0% fraud by having 0% sales, but you need to be able to have that balancing act of as many sales as possible and as less amount of fraud as possible.
Yeah. Ron, to talk a little bit about your solution and the machine learning AI capabilities that your company has. Does your product suite rely on unsupervised or supervised machine learning?
Yeah, great question. It's both. We do both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. And all of that feeds into, real-time updating of our transaction decision platform. We think, as we think what we do is quite innovative today in and of itself. And we're constantly working to enhance what we do and how we do it. And at the same time, we continue to add to our product suite with things like silent pending or the addition of 3D Secure, or so that we can, again, get to a maximum approval level for our customers while keeping, fraudsters at bay. And we continue to build out, that innovation, on a regular basis. Our product development pipeline is long and fluid, yeah.
Cool. So talking about the data sets that you use, you are in the market for 25 years, so there's lots of data. So the rich training data set that you mentioned, where did that training set get sourced from, and what is the recency of the data? So could you elaborate a little bit on that? That's the key
listen,
thing.
it's a data set that gets refreshed daily. Every day we're looking at millions of transactions and making decisions and using those transactions to update the machine so that we continue to make the best decisions possible, both for us and for our customers. That the data has been sourced, the internal data that I referenced has been sourced directly from our own experiences and our own work. We also use third-party data sources as well, again, to inform the machine so that the machine is making the best possible decisions with the most recent data available at any given time.
Yeah. And if you look into your data and you look into sort of global coverage, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I know that you're also expanding into Asia, and I guess, merchants, if you talk about fear of fraud, that could be scary. Okay, I'm going across borders. I know how the US works, so fine, or I know the European market, but then you want to expand. So what is your position there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, we've been a global organization for a long time. We've been working in Latin America for 10 or 15 years. We've been in Europe for 10 or 15 years. We were in China a while ago and left. We recently opened an office in Singapore and launched our first customer in Singapore, in the Philippines recently. And I would say that obviously there's a learning curve, not just geographically, but sometimes even merchant by merchant. But the reality is, the same fraudster that's trying to attack one of our customers in Mexico is probably the same fraudster sitting somewhere in a dark room somewhere trying to attack one of our new customers in Asia. But we certainly have a learning curve. The good news for our customers is that we stand behind our decisions, and we only get paid if we approve a transaction. So our objectives are fully aligned with our customers, and if we're wrong, it's on us. And we don't make crazy commitments out of the gate. We learn together. We generally have what we call a bit of a onboarding process that gives a couple of week or so burn in, so that we can get smart about each other, and so that our customer can get comfortable with us and us with them. It also allows us to make sure all the integrations are working. But they enter a relationship with us, whether it's in a new market like Indonesia, or in one of our legacy markets like the US or Mexico or the UK, with the same payment guarantee. If we're right, it's good for everyone. If we're wrong, it's on us.
So just a little bit about the business model. So you offer a complete liability on yourself, a payment guarantee. So do you offer an outcome-based pricing? How does it work? How do you? I think it's
Yeah, I don't
nice.
want to get into too much of a sales pitch here, but
Well, we get
you
these.
know, every situation is unique, but generally, you know, you know, I will say one thing. Carice talked about sending your riskiest transactions for someone to look at. That's really not the business we want to be in. We want to look at all transactions. And the reason is, you know, we get smart on the good transactions and we get smart on the bad transactions too. And so, you know, there's a risk and reward component that if all you're going to send us is risky transactions, it's going to be very expensive. You know, generally it's on a per transaction basis is the way we price. You know, we do have subscription models and things like that as well. But I think that gives you enough to help you understand how we do what we do and what our business model is.
Makes sense. Another question about your data set. So do you incorporate a merchant's historical or priority data into the model you then use for their transactions? So basically, yeah, you talked about third-party data. Is it also the merchant data that you use?
Yeah, to a certain extent, we do. You know, some of the historical data is harder to use just because it's static and it was decision based on someone's algorithms and models other than our own. And if you don't know, you know, the actual result, there's value, but it's less value than, you know, the data we're collecting on a go forward basis from our customers.
Okay. And have you seen in I mean, you see a lot of transactions, you see a lot of fraud. It's basically your daily bread and butter, but have you seen the fraud increasing during COVID-19? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think on a raw numbers basis, sure, fraud has increased. That's mostly because e-commerce has increased, and you know, even holding it static, you know, on a basis point basis, the actual size of fraud has grown. But as you know, channels like Carice referenced, you know, buy online, pick up in store, have been shut down. Like our cartoon said, you know, there's no physical crime or physical fraud that can be perpetrated. We're moving everything online, and so we have seen an uptick in the activity. And I would say, again, that kind of highlights the importance of, you know, our ability to, in real time, update our models as we learn about new tactics.
Yes, and there's also new sort of, you know, in a proliferation of new types of fraud where, Carice, you mentioned refund fraud being, you know, more prominent right now, but also maybe the buy online, pick up in store, you know, kind of sort of new scenarios. And I'm sure that fraudsters are smart and they will find ways. So can you elaborate on what have you seen, Carice, in these sort of, you know, new use cases and typically sort of new fraud patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. So fraudsters are very smart, but they also can be not so smart as well. So, you know, I prefer the dumb ones, but you know, we like but actually, no, if I'm being honest, I really like the smart ones because I love to learn from them. But
more challenging.
yeah, exactly. I'm always up for a challenge. But I think as far as, you know, when you're thinking about fraudsters, they're going to try to emulate good customer behavior as much as possible. Additionally, their customers are similar to your customers. They're targeting people who sell similar things to you because they're selling your items or your service. And this isn't just for, you know, straight retail, though this is a question, but I know that there are B2B companies and, you know, software as a service and others that also experience fraud every day. So it's not only the traditional physical goods that have fraud. So with that said, they'll emulate, you know, good customers, but they do see buy online, pick up in store as a great opportunity because they don't have to create a drop address. They don't have to find a vacant house or office building, which those are plenty to find right now. But which is an extra step. They also don't have to go through all the validation of everything that they have to when it's just by online. So they also can get it much sooner, and time is important to them because they want to be, like Ron said, Vesta makes split-second decisions. The reason for that is because the fraudster wants the goods as much as possible. So picking up in store is definitely one avenue. And lastly, there were retailers who decided not to look at IDs for a while when they first reopened because they just wanted as many sales as possible. And that information got out on the dark web very quickly. So, definitely something I can always talk about for forever, but we saw them adapt to that very quickly.
Yeah, interesting. To your point, you talked about stronger customer authentication, and basically sort of stepping up authentication of shoppers that seems a little bit suspicious. Then of course we touch upon the point of stronger customer authentication and 3DS 2.0. It's a much talked about topic, but will it merchants help to reach their goals? What is your take on that, or will it help you, get it, doing a better job for your merchants?
Are you asking me or Ron? I wasn't sure.
Ron, Therese, I would love to get both of your viewpoints on this.
Sure, Ron, I'll let you take it first.
Sure. Well, first, listen, I'm a firm believer in 3D Secure, SCA, whatever you want to think about it. But I'm a fan more in the last mile, and I think that's what you were referring to, Melisande. If Vesta or other providers out there can deliver, let's call it 100% certainty on 95% of all transactions. That doesn't mean we're 100% right, but we can deliver 100% certainty on 95% of the transactions. Why would you ever want to introduce any level of friction into any of those transactions? Whether we're approving them or declining them, right? If we're that certain. But that last 5% or that last mile, if you will, the ability to add a strong customer authentication protocol, can be the difference between, 94% approval rates and 97 or 98% approval rates. And that's real money to a customer. And, positioned the right way and done the right way. If we put Carice through that authentication on one of our customers' websites, the next time she's shopping on one of our other customers' websites, we'll know who she is and we won't have to do it again. And positioned the right way, most customers won't have a problem with it, and fraudsters won't bother with it, right? So you'll push them out the door. And I like Carice's analogy of some fraudsters are smart and some are dumb. I also like to talk about, fraudsters are like ants at a picnic. Once one of them finds there's crumbs, they quickly, all their friends show up. And that's the way fraudsters work. And once the picnic is gone and the crumbs are gone, they all leave, right? They don't want to waste time, trying to find if the hole is still open, if their friends have already figured out that it's closed. Doesn't mean they don't come back, they do. And that's why, because they keep changing the way they go about things, and why we need to, continue to update, adapt, and keep pace, as I said, with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, there is a
Please.
big difference between 3D Secure in the US and in Europe. And I wish that wasn't the case. And that is another book I could write about all the differences between Europe and the US. But I recently, in the fall, I worked with a large luxury brand out of Europe that had recently moved their website into the US. And they didn't think fraud would be a problem. They set up all the same systems they used in Europe as they did in the US, and it was it was a big wake up call for them. And a big reason for that is because consumers are not the same in the US as they are in Europe. And I'm sure most of the merchants on this call totally understand that. There was a little bit of a battle between, especially on 3D Secure. They really wanted, they just thought, well, if we just have 3D Secure on the US side, then we won't have fraud anymore. And I thought, but consumers aren't used to that friction when it's 100%. So the provider they were going to use for 3D Secure challenged everything. They pushed everything through. They did, and that is a huge sales killer. And so what I think is important is to be able to select a 3D Secure provider who does risk-based challenge and only does the challenging, as Ron said, on that 5% of orders. And maybe they understand the behavior of the issuers and if the issuer is going to introduce friction or not, and how they do the step up and how they do the OTP and the one-time password, etc. So again, just like fraud isn't, getting a fraud provider isn't going to be the same everywhere, getting a 3D Secure provider isn't going to be the same everywhere either. I think it's really important to know how your provider does that. And I'm saying that knowing that Vesta does it in the way that I think is best. And one little funny anecdote from that client that I had was after I finished the project, I found out that they still wanted to push through 3D Secure on the US site. That's fine. I had, told them my predictions that they would see their sales go down and etc. It lasted 3 weeks and they took it right off again. And I got an email saying that they were calling me the fraud psychic. And I said, I'm not a psychic. I've been doing this a long time. Sometimes I wish I was wrong. Like I want to be wrong. So I think it's important to understand the market that you're in and the provider that you're using. They're not all the same. That's really what I would say from that too.
Great. Ron, despite the issues of growing fraud, and the proliferation of fraud nowadays, Vesta's stance is that zero fraud is not the answer. Help us understand, what do you mean with that?
Yeah, listen, Carice stole my line, but anyone can stop fraud, right? Decline a transaction, and I will guarantee you 100% that transaction will have no fraud. It's probably not a great way to try and build a business though, right? Zero fraud, zero revenue. You know how that story ends. Declining the right transactions though is essential. And, as Carice shared earlier, but it's not just about stopping fraud. It's about ensuring that you're stopping the right transactions and that your good customers are getting through. More than $120 billion in lost sales annually due to false declines or false positives, depending on how you want to think of it, is crippling, right? And it's not the fraud that will get you; it's the fear of fraud that will.
Yeah. And if I could just add one quick thing, one of the smartest fraud leaders that I know of on the merchant side, they actually have changed their fraud prevention team name, and they're no longer fraud prevention. Their team is sales enablement. And I think that that's super important. And it's more than just a title of a team. That is their focus. They're not just looking for fraud and the bad guys and fraud prevention. They're looking for how to enable the good sales. And it's more of a mindset thing than anything. And I think that that's really a pattern that we're seeing with fraud departments changing their title to trust and safety, for example. I mean, the umbrella is much bigger than just payment fraud, but still same thing. I think there's definitely an internal component there as well as to the perspective of fraud fighting. But just to back up what Ron said, it is really important, and the people and the fraud teams who really have the respect and understanding of their management and leadership of their company are the ones who understand that if they can show, hey, we actually increased sales by X, this is how, or we increased the amount of chargebacks we got back, or hey, we had a little bit of fraud, but it wasn't our money. All of those things, that's how leadership really understands the true value of a fraud department. And I know that, you know, fraud departments have had a PR problem for a very long time since I was in fraud on the merchant side, but just a little tidbit that, you know, as you start to focus and show your leadership that you're really caring about increasing sales, in addition to stopping fraud, that's really when you'll get the full backing of them as well.
Well, I'll just share one little highlight on that front too. So I took over as CEO a little over a year ago, and our data science, machine learning, AI team was called risk operations when I got here. And today they're called approval operations. It is about mindset. You have to help people understand that just like our merchants, you know, we're in the business of increasing approvals. And if we're not doing that, we're not doing our job.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to we are almost at our time of this webinar. I think that's a great way to end. You're in the business of enabling sales and avoiding these false positives. And thanks for your insights in the latest fraud trends, what's currently trending, and what are the best approaches to basically during this unprecedented time still enable your sales teams. Your e-commerce business. So thanks a lot. What we will do is we will send all of you a link to the broadcast shortly. And the Vesta team will get back to you on those questions that we did not have time to include during this webinar. I would like to thank the audience and our great speakers, Ron and Carice. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.